Welcome back to Scripting Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Paris. Today, we are going to talk about conversations versus scripting. They are two topics that unfortunately have to intertwine sometimes, but are two mutually exclusive items. The way that we bring them together is how we find a very effective sales directed conversation. And so we're going to dissect each one a little bit and talk about how each has its own purpose. And then when we combine them, you have a very, very powerful message that you can deliver. I remember when I was about 10 years old, I was in, not by my own choice, I was in speech club or had to go to speech meet. And I don't know if any of you were involved with this in these 90s activities. I don't know if this is people even do this anymore, but we had to pick, a quote, a verse, a passage, an excerpt, and memorize that and deliver it in front of a group of people when we were very young. And I remember I remember always choosing the shortest one. I didn't care what it said. I always just wanted to be the shortest. So it was the least painful and easiest to memorize. But I remember having to memorize this and just being motivated by pure fear that I would mess it up in front of my parents or in front of the judges or whoever was there. And I distinctly remember having to repeat this passage or verse or whatever dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And then once I got that down, I would then work on the delivery and really put emotion or tone into it. I really don't ever want to see these. I'm sure they're videotaped, and I am like definitely terrified to see what this sounds like. But I do remember having to practice over and over and over again in the mirror in front of my parents and going to deliver this to kind of win a blue, red, or yellow participation ribbon. And that was it. And you go and you eat Bob Evans breakfast and you go home. You drive 2 or 3 hours to this gymnasium. Everyone's there. You give a couple different speeches and then they grade you and then that's it. But that was a very interesting moment in my life because that's how I started to associate scripting to speech and to how I communicate. And as time went on, I would think about giving speeches that way. So if I had to speak in front of people, I would write it down and memorize it just like it was speech meet. And I realized that was actually a very unhealthy practice for giving a quality and, a message that would resonate with any type of audience. And it took me a while to get out of that. But it was one side of the token on this conversation versus script dialogue that was very one-sided, right? It's very scripted. And so when I move over to the conversation side, there is a different part of your brain you use. There is more cognition, there's more active thought going on, but you might be less focused on delivery or direction or purpose. It could just go off onto your whims and you could end up talking about something you never thought that you would mention during your time with somebody. And so that's where I think the two combine, right? When we're in sales, we have a very directed, purposeful conversation at hand or dialogue at hand or message at hand that needs to get across. So we're not wasting our time. We're not wasting the other person's time. But the caveat to that is all of these dialogues, all of these exchanges with somebody else have to do with building a relationship. So you can't always just have a speech. You can't always be scripted. So what is the balance? How do you find that? It took me a long time as well to be a good conversationalist. I thought that, when going into different social groups or different settings, whether it was with a sports team or whether it was friends at school or whether it was people at work, there's different types of conversations that you kind of have to put different thinking caps on when you're in those environments. how I'm talking with my guys on my soccer team might be different from how I'm talking to my parents, or how I'm talking to people at, a church or at work. And you have to kind of be aware of maybe some of the things that would keep a conversation going. And it took me a long time, and I'm still learning this in different settings as I get to new groups and experience new types of people. You kind of get a reading of the room. What kind of things are going to liven up the energy versus take away from it. And I feel like that is the conversation side, the conversation skill that does take practice. You have to be out with people that are different than you. You have to be out with people that challenge you, and you have to think actively and on the spot in order to carry a conversation forward. And it was maybe sometime in college where I really started to learn to do that, to be more dynamic, to open up my brain to different types of people and different conversation topics and different ways of having dialogue. And so that's something I think happens organically. Some people do it intentionally, where they're really trying to be better in social situations or in conversation scenarios, whether it be with groups or interpersonal or what have you. I know that in those situations, there's a kind of banter that goes on. There can be an exchange of questions to keep a conversation going. There can be storytelling, So how do we apply that? Like, how does that apply to sales? And I think marrying these two things is the topic for today. When we look at sales, right, and we have those two ends, you have the scripted but directional message versus a free flowing relationship building type of exchange. That is the ultimate in sales acumen, sales conversation acumen. So what is it? How do you do that? As it relates to selling, from a cold call to a sales presentation to follow-up calls, to negotiation, to meeting with a board. How do you change your script and your conversation to match that environment and ultimately convert at its highest level, consistently over time? So I want to talk quick about, what is a scripted sales conversation? What does that mean? It's a hard thing it's a more advanced level to be at than just having a script and a speech versus having a conversation with no real purpose. And you have to balance those things in your mind while you're doing it, and it's a muscle that you have to build. So if you're just getting into sales, these are two things to hold in your mind, so that when you go into a conversation, you realize you have to balance the two. You have to have some give and take of each. Or if you're more advanced in sales, how do you take the conversations that you're having and apply more purpose, more direction, without coming across as inhuman or robotic or disingenuous? You're just trying to get to the point. Hey, let's not waste our time here. Do you want this or not? And that's it. So there is a dance between the two, and it can increase infinitely, because one of my favorite things about sales is that until you're converting 100% of the time, there's always something for you to work on. And so that gives you a massive runway for improvement. But let's go back to that. Let's go back to that idea between conversation and scripts, right? Conversation and scripts. So I'm actually reading this without my glasses. So if you're watching me squint, that's why. How do you make a script sound conversational? I think that you could come from two different angles. You could say, how do you make a conversation more purposeful? Or you could say, how do you make a purpose driven or message driven script more conversational? Um, and I think either way, you come to a similar conclusion. You have to have an outline. You have to have a backbone to to the exchange with the other person. Again, apply this to cold calling. This is in the human to human. Right now, I'm talking more in the human to human scripting and messaging and conversation. I think we can touch on some of the email and back and forth there. But let's hold this now for the human to human element. Any environment where you have to have a conversation, with a Zoom meeting, or web conference, or face to face, or it's a cold call, or it's a demo. I think the first and foremost priority in maximizing and optimizing the balance between a script and a conversation is having steps and checkpoints that you need to mark off throughout the call. And what I like about that is that it's not word for word phrases that I'm talking about. So you're not reading from a script. And it's also not a free flowing conversation. Let's just see where it goes. Let's just see if there's a connection. So having bullets, what are you trying to accomplish on this conversation? It has to have a purpose. If it's a cold call, what is your goal of that cold call? Are you trying to one call close this person and get them to sign a contract and pay you by the end of the call? Good luck with that. It does not happen anymore. So I don't remember the last time. We've done thousands of campaigns and not one has ended in a one call close on the call. Maybe they got to another conversation later and that closed. I think we've heard of those, but nothing happens on the first call with that. So let's get that out of our head anyway. But if it's a cold call, a lot of times, many times, there is some kind of appointment that we are trying to set by the end. And that's a fair type of reach. And some others go with free samples, some go with kind of a warm call or gather email or web registration. But let's just kind of go with that appointment, right? On a demo, maybe the goal of the demo is to achieve proposal status. So kind of identify what would be the best fit, go through some pricing, and offer a proposal by the end of the second, or some kind of quote, So then what are the things that we need to hit all in between to get to those points? Well, maybe we need to, open up a dialogue about just who we are. Tell me about yourself. I'll tell you about myself. Tell you about my company. There's a little bit of rapport. Maybe there's some questions, discovery questions. All of these are structure to a sales conversation. And I'm not subscribing to any right now. I'm just opening up that idea that we have to have a bulleted, check-pointed list of things we need to mark off by the end of the call as much as possible. And this is giving us direction. It's giving us a process. It's giving us a system that not only keeps us on target when we're calling or talking in person or wherever we are, but it also allows us to measure and create benchmarks. How did I do this one? How did I do the following? When things got crazy, did I get off track? Did I stay on point? Did it make sense to get off track in some of these? Because, we were having such a good connection or conversation and I didn't want to ruin that opportunity. I've had that happen to me where, hey, let's get off topic here for a second. We have an opportunity to build rapport because we have a connection. Let's take that, but then let's anchor it back in. This is a guide. This is a guardrail when things get stormy or distracting. Sometimes it's not always stormy weather that why we need a guardrail. Sometimes it's because there's distractions that can get us off, because things are feeling good, but we shouldn't always go with that. We should let that kind of run its course and then come back and stay on target. Starting with a goal is important when ensuring you are following a sales direction. You need to know the steps and then know the points that you're going to make within those steps. If you start to write this out, you might want to have some versions of what it could sound like. So if I'm on a cold call, I know I'm trying to set an appointment. What steps do I want to meet? Right? Do I want to have an intro? Do I want to have an opening question? Do I want to have an opportunity to give my proposition? And then, some other follow-up pieces, and then end with the ask. And as I do that, I get to formulate some type of bulleted structure to the call. And now, so you have a level of scripting in there because the purpose, but maybe, you don't have it refined enough where, you are able to deliver some of these pieces succinctly and without getting off track and losing your potential customer. And that's where the conversational side can be dangerous, because this is all about your prospect. So being attuned and aware of how they're responding to your process or to your conversation is how you take that um, danger of getting off track and keeping it on point. So there's kind of this construction, right, of the balance. You have to have a backbone, okay, but that doesn't necessarily get you a great sales conversation. So having a bit more structure to it at first can help you kind of build scaffolding around a conversation. So start with a bulleted list that you can mark off, meaning as you go through the conversation, you can just kind of check off those boxes to make sure you hit those points. But within those steps, maybe there's certain value propositions or things that you want to hit so that the person on the other end can understand the impact of their business to their business with what you offer. So maybe there's going to be certain of these steps that you do need to write out. You do want to make sure that you have said in your own words so it comes out naturally and it comes out in a conversation. Because I can go through in a conversation and talk about the weather. I can talk about, how you found us or how we came across each other, or make a comment about your business. But then once I get into what the meat and potatoes of the conversation, and I haven't scripted it out or I haven't practiced it, even today, like if I'm doing something new like that, it can get way off, and I can lose myself, and then in turn lose the audience. While it's sounding like we're getting more and more scripted, what you're really doing is you are building a priority of things to learn first: structure, and then a little bit of a plan, maybe some scripting to get you saying these things so they're in your brain, in your vocabulary, in your word bank. Maybe then trying without that and saying it yourself, saying it in the mirror, and then role playing it with somebody before you go out and have these conversations. Cold call, demo, sales closing, negotiating, boardroom, group setting. All of these different environments can require different types of scripts and different types of deliveries that can be optimized with practice. That's where I've found the most success. Managing sales teams before Superhuman, coming to Superhuman Prospecting and having to come up with scripts for different cold call campaigns, having to then pitch Superhuman Prospecting at different levels for different size companies, for different groups, solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, mid-sized companies, large companies, in front of rooms. I've had to prepare. I've messed up by not preparing the script enough. I've messed up because I wasn't as conversational and to the point because I was afraid to get off topic, and kind of took the energy out of the room and maybe lost some people in the robotic nature of what I was doing. So conversation versus structure, right? Hopefully these things are resonating with you, but it's really those ideas of balancing the two. I think there's one more point here is once you've kind of found that structure and you've found the points that you want to say, and then you've written them out, and then you've practiced them and you've delivered them, then you're getting into the next level. You're actually building yourself on that foundation. So now we can talk about, well, what separates conversation structure and sales structure versus personality. So that is another way of saying it, but it what we've been talking about, but it also builds on itself. When you can start to separate the value and the message of what you're trying to sell, then you know which side is your personality. And that's an important distinction, because when part of the reason I started H2H and Superhuman was because of the scripting that was available was very much someone else's personality into a written format. And when I tried to do that, it was almost like I was not only trying to sell and have a conversation, but also be a character that wasn't me. Have you guys ever felt that? You got this script and it was like some kind of cheesy joke in the beginning to get by the gatekeeper or to open up with a decision maker, and you just had that cringe. Like I've gotten these scripts before from clients where uh, it was you're calling some physician's office and you're talking about marketing, and you have to like open up with this joke, and then you go right into the script, and even in like parentheses it says haha, make sure you laugh or something like that. And that to me is uh, a failure in scripting. And part of the reason why we're doing this whole series, because there hasn't been a lot about scripting written. There's not a ton on topic, and I mentioned this before. So bringing this back to that difference between personality and scripts, right? That you have to know strip away anything that could be um, strip away anything that could be an addition to just the value. We all have these personality preferences, and I think you have to have them. I think it's our crutch. It's what makes us comfortable and what makes us authentic. When I'm making a cold call, I like to, a lot of times, depending on the market, say, hey, my name's Ryan with Superhuman Prospecting. I'll be transparent. This is a cold call. And I just kind of pause, because that's their opportunity to get off the phone for me. It makes me feel better, because if they don't say anything, I know when I continue, and that they understand that this has to do with the sales partnership. And I'm not trying to, hypnotize them or wave my magic wand in order to get them to agree to something. And the whole time they're trying to figure out, is this a sales call? And that's the worst feeling to have as a potential customer, as a prospect, is, man, what is this call about? Why is this person asking me how I'm doing? Why is this person trying to not reveal who they are? If I can get that up front before anything even starts, then I've already diffused that. And that's what makes me feel better. Now, I've done it plenty of times without it. Hey, my name is Ryan with Superhuman Prospecting. We do cold call appointment setting for companies like yours. Do you have an outsourced lead gen partner right now to help make cold calls for you to generate more leads and appointments for your sales pipeline? Or have you considered anything like that? So I can say it without it, but at the same time, it makes me feel better. It makes me know that I know what to work with if anything comes after that. And some people don't like to use that. Some people like to have a permission-based opener, because it makes them feel like once they've gotten permission, then they can open up. Some folks like to say, hey, how are you doing? It really just allows it to be more of a human or relationship-based conversation. So these things are personality preferences, and I would challenge you as a second level of learning here, a higher level of learning, once we get that balance between conversation and scripting, to then learn to separate the personality aspects to your script. Even if you're reading it yourself, even if the script is for you, and just drill it down to the bare bones messaging, questions, propositions, statements, moments to listen, active listening moments. Really drill that down and lean it to only that. And a good way to practice that is maybe if once you've written it, give that to somebody else to look at and see if they could sound natural with it or add in their own personality to it. Because if they can, then that means that you've got it to a point where it is a lean, structured script that can be much more conversational based upon the authenticity or the personality of the person that's going to be using it. The more you can do that, the more powerful the message is and the more authentic the delivery will be. And that's what I would leave you with today, is finding, are you more script oriented or are you more conversation oriented, and trying to find that balance between the two. Conversation folks try to be a bit more structured. Structured folks open up the conversation a little bit more and use your personality while hitting those points, and then figure out which of that messaging is more personality, which one is more structure, right? And eliminate any of that personality from the bones of the scripts and add that in as you're going through your conversation. You'll see that it'll be more natural and you'll have conversations that resonate with the prospects on the other end. So, thanks for joining. Hopefully, this helped you. If you have any comments or questions about this topic, I'm more than happy to answer it. It has to do with cold calling, it has to do with demos, it has to do with negotiation. And I think that human to human, we'll stop it at the human to human, is one to just to pause and reflect on before we go into any type of email messaging or conversation messaging through writing, because that is a bit different. So we'll stop it there. Thanks so much for joining, and I will see you next time on Scripting Sales.